be the case. The truth is, what all of us represent here is, well, the new Bronx, the new millennium, so to speak. Thank you. That's perfect. That's perfect. Today's lecture is about time in the calendar. Now, many of you come from countries from around the world. How many of you have a calendar that is followed differently than the one that we have here today on March 4th, 1999? Anyone have a different calendar? Yes. What is your country? Well, we're going to go around. What's your name? Juan. What calendar do you use?
I use one.
And what kind of calendar is that?
It's like different time with different pictures on it.
Different pictures. But I'll bet you they're the same months, because
It's the same calendar.
it's the same calendar. That's right. There is no change. All right, but we just heard from someone else.
Chinese lunar calendar.
That's right. The Chinese, of which there are about 1.2 billion people, use a lunar calendar. A lunar calendar is different than the solar calendar. The solar calendar being the sun. But if you stop to think about it, what exactly is time? Now, everybody can see the clocks over there. That clock says it's 20 to 7, right? 20 to 7. Where's your family from? Puerto Rico. Give me some far away. China. From far away in China, let's just say, if I brought that piece of time material, that clock, to your family, would they be able to tell that it was 20 to 7? They may call the 7 different.
Day and night difference.
Do they use a 12-hour clock? That's my point. The answer is yes.
20 to 7 in the morning next day.
Right, okay. But they still use a 12-hour timepiece. Now that is universal. Across these lands, these seas, all of humans follow this 12-hour cycle. Now, in the military, they use 24 hours. A lot of countries still use 24 hours as well. But think about the arbitrariness of 24 hours. The true rhythm of an individual is about 25 and a half hours. They have a circadian rhythm of our heart. You know, would you really go to sleep every 24 hours? No, actually it's 25 and a half, 26. Animals seem to work differently. Someone made a decision to call it 24 hours. But let's stop to think for a moment. What really is time? What truly is a time thing? Now think about it. What makes time? If it was 2,000 years ago, and we were on the Egyptian delta, waiting for the Nile to flood, and then recede so that we could plant, what would time be to us there? The annual flooding. Every year, the Nile seemed to flood at the same time. And after a while, about 1,000 years of watching it, they were able to tell up in the sky, there always seemed to come a constellation of stars at the same time. So to them, that was the beginning of the year. As soon as they saw that constellation, they knew the Nile was going to flood. And within a small amount of time, and what would they use as their time base? What's an obvious time base? What? Okay, go a little closer, though. The sun. And what happens to the sun? It sets, right. So people say, how many days? Whether they call it a day or not, the point is they say, the sun comes up, the sun goes down, the sun comes up again is 1. 2, 3. The idea of a week, that's still to come. That's not an issue. Months still to come. So the normal thing about time, you do have a regular, organized way to really tell time. One is through the annual sunrise to sunrise. Well, what's another one? You just talked about the lunar calendar. Why the lunar calendar was the first calendar was because the lunar calendar worked. Well, why did it work? If you looked up in the night sky, sometimes you'd see the moon full. Other times it would be half, piece, nothing. So you remember stories where people would talk about in 3 moons, something will happen. What are they talking about? Full moons. So that's time. The idea of a year's time is what the Nile was using. So we have day, true daytime. You have true lunar time. And if you are truly watching something like the Egyptians were doing, watching for when the Nile would flood so they get ready to plant, that would be a year's time. Now that was sufficient for about 3,000 years, from about 5,000 years ago to maybe, well, maybe about 2,000 years ago. Something else started to occur. People started to get together. They started to leave their tribes and join city-states. And in a place called Mesopotamia, are there any people here from the area, Iraq, Iran? Anybody from there, that area? Well, that's called the Tigris-Euphrates, the cradle of civilization. There's two rivers there. And these two rivers, one's the Tigris, one's the Euphrates, and right in that area were the great nation-states of Babylonia, Sumer, the Sumerians. They were incredible, advanced civilizations, as we had never seen before. So some of them went back about 4,000 years ago, and they started to establish these city-states. And they had people that spent all their time looking at the sky, watching the sky to see if there's something there that they can follow in the next year, maybe in the next month, maybe the next day. They did so well at this that they were able to figure out when there would be solar eclipses. What's a solar eclipse? Remember when the moon blocks the sun. Think of the power that a priest would have if he could declare when a solar eclipse could occur. Well, they were able to do that 4,000 years ago, or at least 3,000, that's for sure. Extraordinary power to do such a thing. This was what time started to become. But for the normal individual, well, he's a farmer. He gets up in the morning, he goes to bed at night. He's doing what's keeping things going. That's how he's operating. This show is just an attempt to give you some ideas. Now, we could talk a little bit afterwards. But feel free to ask questions as we go along if it becomes a little confusing. It's called Time and Its Reckoning. And this slideshow on time and how man has developed ways to, well, to measure it. That's a sharp picture too. This is a photograph of the Jeffrey Pyne. Now, living things measure time. Trees, for example, are the oldest living things, as far as we know, that have been measuring time for thousands of years. This Jeffrey Pyne is supposedly many thousands of years old, and it lives in the Sierra Nevadas. That's the mountain range in California. The oldest trees, of course, the bristlecone pine, also living in California. Looks like it's dead, these trees, but they're not. They're the oldest living organism as we know it. Methuselah's tree, it's just a name that they call it, is located in the California White Mountains. And some of these trees have been dated to 4,600 years ago. You think what that means, 4,600 years ago. But recently there's been discussions of bacteria possibly being thousands of years old. It might very well be that under the ice in Mars, under the ice of the polar regions on Earth, that there may be bacteria there. We're still locating this to see whether or not that's true. But as far as we know, these trees represent the oldest living forms in the world. Now, how do trees tell time? Everybody remembers this. Usually someone brings it up. We'll take a look. There it is. Rings, right. They set rings down, and you could tell how old that little jack pine is by counting those rings. The rings are not evenly distributed, as you can see. It could be a good year, it could be a bad year. What's a good year for a tree? It's when it's got enough moisture, got enough minerals, got enough sugar. But they show the influence of environment, particularly changes in climate. The study of tree rings, thus tree time, is called Dendrochronology. It's a dating of objects that have historical events by this study and the growth of rings. So when they find something, when archaeologists find pieces of wood, say on something they're digging in one of the African civilizations, and they take that piece of wood, they can actually examine it under a microscope and now compare the date of when that wood was taken out. And because they have a full study of all these different types of trees, they're able to tell the kind of tree it is, and then they're able to tell a date. Well, that's very good if you think about it.
This thing what you just show us?
Yeah, the tree rings.
Yeah, well, how many years? About 15? Or?
Yeah, no more than that. That was actually just a branch. Now, what you're looking here is a typical square.